Today we're talking about the one man who could have been king but decided to just go home and farm instead. That's right, George Washington, the general, the statesman, the founding father, the one who set the standard nobody else could quite live up to. But most of us know the image: tall, stoic, powdered wig, face on the dollar bill. But behind the marble statue was a flesh and blood man who didn't even want the presidency in the first place. And yet, he took it, shaped it, and basically invented the job before the job even ever was. So let's dive into the soldier, the farmer, the reluctant leader, and our first president, George Washington. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that kept
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Born in 1732, Washington grew up in Virginia's planters class. But let's be clear, he wasn't a rich aristocrat. His father died when he was 11, and George missed out on the fancy English schooling his younger brothers got. That left him with a chip on his shoulder and a burning ambition to prove himself. He trained as a land surveyor, trekking into the wilderness, mapping frontier territory, and picking up a taste for land speculation. Translation: Washington wanted money, respect, and acres, lots of acres. By his early 20s, he was wearing a militia officer's uniform and looking for glory, which is how he blundered straight into starting the French and Indian War in 1754. He ambushed some French troops, things spiraled, and suddenly the colonies were at war. Whoops. Washington got captured, signed a humiliating surrender, and had to walk away. Not exactly the heroic debut. But here's the thing. Washington learned. He rebuilt his reputation, fought with stubborn courage, and came out of the war respected as a man who didn't quit. After the war, Washington went back to Mount Vernon. He expanded the estate, experimented with crops, and married Martha Custis. I knew I was going to get that wrong. She was a wealthy widow with serious land and money. That gave him the stability and status he craved since boyhood. He should have been set for life, farming, fox hunting, being a respectable Virginia gentleman. But Washington also had a reckless streak. He wanted honor. And when the colonies started clashing with Britain, he didn't hesitate. He put on the uniform again. And Congress picked him to lead the Continental Army in 1775. But why? Because he was experienced, dignified, and let's be honest, tall enough to look the part, right? The war was brutal, though. Washington had lost more battles than he'd won, but he refused to give up. After New York collapsed, he pulled off the bold strike at Trenton. At Valley Forge, he held the army together through starvation and frostbite. Washington wasn't America's greatest tactician, but he was its backbone. His presence kept the revolution alive, and when it ended, he shocked the world by resigning his command. He walked away, gave power back. It was absolutely unheard of. Back home, Washington wanted peace, but the Articles of Confederation fell apart, states squabbled, and the country needed saving. Washington presided over the Continental Convention, giving it legitimacy, and then, surprise, got unanimously elected president, not once, but twice. But here's the twist. He didn't want it. He dreaded it. He wrote about how much he longed for retirement, but his sense of duty won, yet again. The presidency didn't exist before him, so Washington had to invent it. He created the cabinet, balancing Jefferson and Hamilton's screaming matches. He steered America clear of foreign wars when France and Britain tried to drag us in again. And after 2 terms, he walked away, again, refusing to be king. And that decision alone made him legendary. By giving up the power twice, he set the example that the presidency wasn't a throne. Washington was disciplined, reserved, and even awkward. He wasn't much of a speaker. He owned enslaved people, a contradiction he wrestled with all his life. And in his will, he freed them. The only major founding father to do so. But he wasn't perfect. But perfection wasn't his legacy. Restraint was. Washington could have been a dictator twice, with the army and in the presidency. And twice, he chose to just go home. That's why I like to call George Washington the reluctant president. He didn't want the job, but he did anyway, because his country needed him. And that might be the real measure of leadership. Not ambition, not restraint, not chasing power, but knowing when to give up. And without Washington, the presidency might have turned into another throne. And without him, we would just have another king. But with him, it became a trust, something to serve, not to rule. So next time you pull out a crumpled dollar bill out of your pocket, remember, that isn't just the face of a founder. It's the guy who showed us what leadership by humility really looks like. I know these are short. There's so much information out there about these guys that I'm going to be talking to from, episode 46 to episode 70. You can go and do research and read a lot more about them. I just want to give you a quick overview. The White House has been doing really, really cool AI versions of the Founding Fathers as well. Highly recommend going and watching those. Those are so cool. But I really appreciate you coming and listening to our little show. And remember, history isn't boring. It's the story of ordinary people who'd rather be somewhere else, but end up shaping the world. I'll see you next time.